aside from custom fields, what is the next most performance impacting part of Jira? So I'll throw that out to the panel as a whole. Is there anyone that wanted to dive into that one first?
Sure, I'd be happy to weigh in on that one first. The first one that comes to mind for me is concurrent users. So this is not just the number of active users you have in Jira, it's sort of the number that you have online using Jira at any given time. For single server deployments, you might find that it's being overloaded at network level at peak usage hours, say when everyone's signing in at 9 o'clock to run their day-to-day tasks. It can result in slow response times at network level. Loading agile boards should be a virtually instant request if Jira is operating smoothly. So any longer than 2 to 4 seconds can be an early sign that your server is struggling to keep up with just user-generated traffic. All other configuration elements are worth considering here. Project and issue count is a good at-a-glance measure of how your Jira is growing. Lack of archiving can block up Jira's index, resulting in slow search functionality. Might not apply to every Jira admin, but to reiterate from my previous talk, third-party apps can open up a lot of different doors to a lot of performance issues. So to revert to script runner, it can perform thousands of API calls in a very short amount of time, which can drive up CPU memory utilization. And the same will go for another leading app in its field, EasyBI reporting. It pulls data directly from Jira to store in its own database. We run into issues with clients where these synchronizations were running during peak usage hours, competing with users, consuming database threads, etc. So yeah, if anyone else has any points to make on that note.
Yeah, go on.
Go ahead.
No, you go.
All right. I'd like to second Peter's point about apps, specifically automation apps, script runner, automation for Jira. Automation for Jira is especially notorious because that your project admins have access to that, which means if they get especially onerous, they may go crazy with it. And I've seen that bring a Jira instance that's otherwise well tuned to its knees. I'd also raise workflows as a consideration there, especially complex workflows, especially customized workflows, and having a lot of them are definitely a warning sign to look out for as far as configurations.
Yeah. And on that, when it comes to customizations and apps, I would look out for scripted fields. They can often be a bane in the way they're loaded. And one table which you actually got to be careful about is the history of the issues, actually the issue history table, because in script runner, how it used to do with the time and status one, it would check the actual issue history table, and when you loaded in your search, or you had that in and you had a filter with anything, it would load in that and do a query for every single issue that was loaded. It would load the whole table and do a massive non-indexed search. And I had a customer where 40% of their database CPU time was spaced just because of that single scripted custom field that was just checking the issue history. So you want to be really careful with that. And also when it comes to automation, as Kurt mentioned, you want to be really careful when you have, and with workflows, as Rodney mentioned, when you have circular loops of automation. That can really easily happen, where you have a few issues that just tick around. Maybe you have some sort of expiry task or they're processing something, and you'll have a few issues that just get orphaned somewhere and just disappear into the void, and they'll sit there and tick their little loops of code forever and ever and ever, and no one will notice. But somehow you'll have 20% less available CPU, or you'll have random crashes of just threads being locked up because this just finally went haywire. So be careful with automation, especially when it comes to complex workflows. That's what I would say, yeah.
Yeah, completely second what all of the colleagues just said. One thing that comes to my mind being, just out of the experience with some of my customers, so REST API is always a hot topic. Be aware of what customers or end users are doing with the REST APIs. Some of the methods that got removed finally had a severe impact to the overall performance. So it's good to have an understanding what is happening on your system. And also for the scaling and performance topics, especially on the calculated fields, for example, one of the first questions I always ask, does it scale? People who implement that are always like, oh yeah, that works perfectly fine. And they test it with 10 issues, 20 issues, whatsoever. And then you have a customer with a project of 350,000 issues, and you have any kind of implementation that sums up estimations from the subtask to the story, to the epic and above. And if you have 5,000 users doing that in parallel, you can really handle the system. So in the end, also a strong suggestion, if you introduce any kind of new third-party apps or things like that, really plan some time for testing purposes.
Cool, perfect. If you have several instances and have had little governance with thousands of projects per instance, how do you recommend starting to create some governance over the projects? Where should you start?
I can just quickly chip in a short answer for that. So you need to actually first look at what is your organizational structure. We can't tell you where to start with your governance because we don't know how your company's structured, how many people you have, how many in that type of group, what are the leaders, what knowledge and what insight do they have into Jira. So you first have to start by actually looking at how is your organization structured, write that down, and then map that onto Jira. And then you see, okay, who do I talk to get information about what's set up? Because you have to get the requirements of why are things the way they are? Who needs this? Why is it set up the way it is? And who told you to make this, basically? You have to somehow start chipping away at information. But if you don't know who to talk to and who can make a decision about something, you won't be able to get to the root of it. So you actually have to start looking at who can make a decision for what parts of the system, and who do you need to talk to, who's above you and who's below you.
Well, sorry. Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Fe. I'm Flora's co-worker, teammate. I'm from DEISER. I'm the support specialist. And well, I would like to chip in because we have a really good example, and use case about this, about how to start checking your governance, how to start seeing what's happening in your instances. As Jeff said, you have to know who's who has the authority of making changes in different places of Jira. But also we have this use case. Flora already mentioned a little bit about it, in her talk, and we really focus on the schemes of those projects, on the issue schemes, and the workflows. Which workflows are here? Which workflows are doing what in Jira, and that use case, if you want, we can share the link later, in order for you to check from our documentation. This use case will let you know with our app profiles, project track, how and where people are using different schemes and different workflows, which you will be able to change later in order to have more governance, and maybe change a way of working in your company in order to make it a little bit easier. So back to you, Ronnie.
All right. What I'd put here is with thousands of issues across multiple Jira instances, I highly doubt all of them are being used. I just go through, map them out, figure out which ones may not be being used, go to their project leader or whoever's working on, who was working on that, and go, is this still needed? If not, go ahead and either use Data Center's built-in archiving function or just save a copy of it and export and delete it.
Yeah, just to add for myself as well, almost repeating the kind of point that Jeff mentioned, was as well as knowing what as is, what you're working on at the moment is, and it may or may not work for you. This something that we did was we didn't realize how many admins we actually had on the system, that people just going in, making changes, and no one knew about it. So one of the things I'd do as well to kind of almost like stop you chasing your own shadow is who's making changes and how often they're making them. Should they really be making those changes? It might be a case you have to restrict some admin access to stop yourself when you're making progress. It's just moving further away from you, if that makes sense.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone. What's a recommended number of Jira admins that we should allow? Less is always best, but wondering what the panel has seen. And they have about 1,000 users in their Jira instance, for context.
I think this links directly to one of my my discussion's talking points. There's no inherent issue with a large number of admins in any Jira instance. It's important that Jira admins know what they're doing. So when it comes to adding new Jira admins, you want to make sure that they're not going to sort of mess up any of the configuration that you have in place. And bandwidth is always an important point. If your service desk, your Jira service desk is being overflown with issues from users about features, updates, performance degradation, anything, it may be time to add new users. And that's where sort of training also comes into play. So it's dependent on each instance's situation, really. Anyone else can weigh in.
Yeah, and sort of an extension on that. I think a lot of how many admins you can have is dependent on how far are you along the sort of path of establishing standards and governance. And the more standards and governance you have, the bigger of an admin team you can have collaborating. If you have a really, really big team, but you have no standards, you have no documentation, you have no good comms, you're not going to be able to collaborate between all those admins. So you're going to have repeat action, you're going to have conflicts, and you're going to have admins implementing the same things in different ways and causing duplicates and misconfiguration. So you really want to make sure that you're actually, you have that standard in place and that training, as Pete mentioned, in place before you actually add new administration. So just make sure that you're scaling your administration staff together with your documentation and standardization.
I will comment on this. How many max admins you should have is always a question. It depends on the workload, what your user's doing, what your standards are. But that being said, I do feel there's always a minimum of at least 2. That way, if someone goes on vacation, you're not waiting for them to come back to get something done. You have that kind of redundancy there. But that being said, maximum, all these people are correct. It all depends on how mature you are with your standards, where things stand, what's going on.
Great, perfect. What would you recommend to explore or investigate if the end users are complaining on slow instance performance?
I'll go ahead and kind of touch on this. I think it's going to depend if you're able to replicate it or not. If they're reporting slow instance and you're not seeing it in your own view, it may be something going on in their location. So it might be time to just do a remote session, run some diagnostics between their instance and the server, see if it's going through VPN, and that may be the problem. Traceroute is a great tool for this kind of thing. If everyone is reporting slow performance, it's probably more an issue with the Jira system itself, and that's when we start going through this various bottlenecks.
Yeah, and I think it's always a good idea to refer to the over-reliable application logs or Tomcat logs. Jira is never really hesitant to tell you when it's running out of JVM heaps. So yeah, there's always a chance that the logs will tell you exactly what's going on.
Yeah, one thing, go on, sorry, Kurt, go on.
No, Jeff, go first.
Okay, all right. One thing that I would keep in mind when it comes to slow performance from users, as in many things, I think people will have seen this customization, and you might not be able to replicate it. They will say, this issue doesn't load for me. You go there, loads perfectly. And you ask other users, they have no problem. But then once you actually go in as that user, you will see, hey, it doesn't load. And that can be due to customizations in web panels that you put in a script runner. It could be to automation you put in, or a third-party plugin that has either permission issues, loading issues, or it's doing an action which that user possibly can't do, or due to, let's say, a network configuration. Let's say you set up something to pull it from another website, but that website is only available from within your VPN network, so it's secure. Maybe that user isn't connected to the VPN, and therefore they can't see that. So always keep in mind third-party configuration when debugging it, as it might not be due to Jira, and there might not be any logs for it. So always try and replicate it in a secure environment where you can play around and test a bit and see if that happens on your staging instance, because you should always have a staging instance. And then what I would recommend that you look at is, are there any issues you're seeing? Let's say you're going into the custom fields. Are all the custom fields loading in the Jira interface? There might be database corruption, might be index corruption as well that might be happening. So you could have the users are taking actions, and that's being based on incorrect data from the get-go, and that could just be compounding an issue. And that could be due to bad maintenance, bad upgrades, or just issues having occurred due to often third-party plugins. So if you use a tool such as Optimizer or another administration tool, you can often see those issues coming up, as you will have things which have null values in areas where we'd actually expect a value to exist. Yeah, that's me. So
one thing that I would suggest, quite often we are kind of reactive. Users are complaining on slow instance or performance of the instance, but do we have a clear definition of what is good? And do we have appropriate monitoring in place for all of the layers, database, operating system, your infrastructure itself, and the application itself, to become more proactive and be aware, and also have a neutral point of view, because your monitoring system, it's there, it does the same checks all of the time. So you will have a feeling, is my instance or is my system performing well, or are we already running into some problems? And then you can also inform your end users appropriately. So in the chat, I just shared a link, hopefully. Yeah, it's in the answer section. There's some knowledge base articles out there, how to start. If you have performance problems with your Jira service, where to start. So as the colleagues just mentioned, there are so many layers that could impact that, from your crappy browser up to we have database issues on the other side. So it's good to take all of these into account.
And just one last point I was thinking of, as especially Jeff was talking, it's absolutely a pet peeve of mine. If a user is reporting slowness and you can't replicate it, don't just write it off as not replicate it. Go to that user, see what they're seeing, go through their experience, see it through their eyes. That way you get an idea what's going on. Maybe something you can't replicate because you're an admin, but the only way to see that is through their eyes. Don't just, absolutely a pet peeve of mine.
As a support dude for a third party app, I can tell you, these three guys that just spoke, they're absolutely right. Please, make sure to go through the experience of the user, make sure that the third party app, it's correctly configured. We had many cases of scripts really doing a big damage, field scripts from our app, that they were so big, that they were asking for so much information, that the performance was really slow. In that case, we really suggested to look into the script, and make sure that they try to make it a little bit easier, and a little bit, how do you say that it didn't ask for so many information as they could do, at the end. In the end, they could make the script better, and the performance was way better after that, So I back up all what these three guys just said. Okay.
Just as a little point on scripts, especially, try and adhere to good coding practice. We can tell you however much we want to not use scripts that much, but I know they're there for a reason. People do need them. Try and use variables. Put your variables at the top of the script, and always put a bypass mode in. Put a little check in the beginning where you can just write false and that it won't run. Put in bypasses, enable you to flick, if it's a massive one or a really complex one, allow yourself to flick on and off parts of it. Put all the variables. If you're accessing custom fields, put the IDs and variables at the top. Make a big code block that has comments there. It says, here are the control variables. So when the next admin comes in, even if you didn't have time to write documentation, at least everything is clear at the top where it's controlled. And when you need to do testing, let's say we had that loading issue. A user just you can't load that issue. Just it's a white screen, nothing happens. If you can just go into that web panel and just put that to false, or maybe even have it advanced enough that you can write in, ignore this user ID. That can allow you to actually test things very easily. You don't have to remove things and add them back in. You don't have to change any configuration. And even if you make the testing a bit simpler, because you can just write a standardized code block that does this sort of ignore if this user and everything. You can put that into every single script. And with that, you can now test every single problem for every single user without actually impacting anyone else. So just put a bit extra time into writing that script, make it easy to use and make it easy to control. Yeah, that's all I want to add.
We'll throw one over to the DEISER team, which obviously they've shown us Project Track today. But obviously with the big moves to cloud in recent announcements, are all the features that you showcased today available in the cloud version of Project Track?
Well, unfortunately, no. I don't know if you remember Flora's last feature that she showed the bulk operations into project fields, into different roles. That's not available on cloud. There's some kind of technical investigation that we need to go ahead during this year that probably will get through, you know, and hopefully in just a matter of time we'll get that feature on cloud. But well, most of the stuff that Flora showed today is available. Also, scripts are not available. I'm sorry right now. Also, you know, in cloud, it's really difficult to apply them, you know, but we're investigating it, you know, and hopefully during this year. But most of the features that you have left, apart from those two, you have in cloud. And if you go right now into cloud and check profiles, Project Track, sorry, we just renamed it recently, and it's really difficult, you know, to remember the actual name right now. It's Project Track. Project Track is you know, available on cloud. But if you go ahead and check Project Track in cloud right now, you're gonna see one version which is gonna be really different from next week. I believe that we're gonna update it, and there's gonna be many changes in different features. You know, it's gonna be faster. It's gonna be prettier. You know, I'm really glad to say that because it's gonna look even cooler. You know, but the most important thing is that the performance is going to be a lot better. You know, we have been working throughout this whole year, you know, and we're trying to do that, exactly that. We're trying to even the experience that we have with Project Track server and data center to cloud. So I hope that you can see that, you know, in the coming weeks or days. I hope.
Bro.
Yeah, exactly. I think Fede said it all, but we should launch the new version in the next days. And definitely it will improve a lot the experience, apart from adding new features also. So last year have been about improving the security. We've been working really hard with Atlassian, and I'm sure you guys from AppFox have been through the same with all the bug bounty program to make it more secure for our customers. But yeah, this year will be about adding features and understand exactly the need of our customers, because obviously not all the features would be able to be launched, unfortunately, in cloud. But also we're trying to collect a lot of feedback from our customers to check which should be the priority. So yeah, thank you for this question.
If there was a requested change to a workflow for, say, a new field, how would you or the team handle that?
Yeah, so it comes down, I think I mentioned it, the non-standard request procedure we have, which is basically like a forum on our IT service desk, which looks at, it's generally the process for any kind of IT changes, but specifically for Jira, if you want to say, I don't know, when you put it on hold, I want a field to appear if something is selected. It goes basically through this forum, which happens on every Monday of, well, what is it? Do we need it? You know, how crucial is it? Would it be useful for everyone else? And if that is kind of the, well, actually, yes, we think it might be quite useful from a management perspective, it almost goes down a level to the actual, if not the leads or the heads of each service desk. So say HR, customer services, IT. Like, well, what is the feature? Do we think it's useful? Or actually, does it contradict something else that we need? Is it just cluttering it up? So it kind of goes through two quality gates. And if generally there's a consensus of yeah, this is useful, then we'll look at implementing it. If it's more of a, well, we don't really need it, you could do that elsewhere, we've got something that could do that already, and then we just don't do it to try and stop cluttering up the system and adding on those copious amounts of custom fields and automation or anything like that.
When it comes to advanced auditing, could you give an example of the file externalization and further processing with log management tools, please?
Absolutely. So all the information that is captured for the events is also written to a log file, an audit log file, which is in a JSON format. So you can take that file, and depending, just thinking of the else, like the Elasticsearch, Logstash, Kibana, you could use then the Logstash component to do regular expressions, just pulling out the information out of the JSON and forward it then to Elasticsearch itself. And on top of that, visualize the outcome with Kibana. So absolutely. I think on the public available web page, there's also some information for Splunk or other third-party solutions available. So just have a look. And one of the relevant links is part of the presentation. So I think it's a good starting point.